Today on Ag News Daily.
We all actually came together and then collectively we worked on this, at a very rapid pace. This is by far the fastest manuscript I have ever worked with. Within 2 months, we actually finished the study and then we came out and put it out there, simply because we need to address that concern of our stakeholders. Why is it happening in dairy cattle right now?
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. Delaney squared for the show this week. That's funny to say, isn't it?
It is.
Referencing your own name to the other person, but that ought to make our lives a little easier this week.
It should.
Well, we're excited to have you in the host seat with me. I'm excited to be back in the host seat, of course, after some time off. But what do you say we jump into some weather for today?
Let's go for it.
Well, temperatures were cool this week, but heading into the weekend here in the Midwest, they're going to raise this weekend ahead of a new front coming in next week that could bring more showers. Potential severe weather fronts and scattered showers are likely for some areas of the Midwest in the upcoming week. Most areas in the Midwest are in good shape at the moment when it comes to conditions, but pockets of the region missed some of that incoming rain. Could lead to more dryness concerns for reproductive corn filling and pod filling for soybeans, especially with longer-term temperatures looking maybe more hot and dry after we get through some of these scattered showers. So that could certainly impact some crop condition ratings as well.
Oh, for sure. With that being said, corn condition ratings dipped a little over the last week, while soybean ratings held steady. Ratings followed another favorable week of weather in much of the Midwest and Plains, while forecasts for this week again show that hotter and drier stretch in some of the growing areas that it could cause stress in those developing crops. The USDA says 67% of U.S. corn is rated good to excellent, down 1%, with 61% of the crop silky and 17% at the dough-making stage, both faster than the 5-year averages. 68% of soybeans are rated good to excellent, with 65% blooming and 29% at the pod setting stage, again ahead of average. 76% of winter wheat is harvested compared to the average 72%, and 77% of spring wheat is rated good to excellent, with 89% headed slightly slower than the normal pace.
Well, we're going to take a look at spring wheat conditions here a little bit later in the show, too, as we look at this week's spring wheat quality tour. But taking a look at some other news, Syngenta has submitted a proposed label for a new product containing dicamba and S-metolachlor. It is the third manufacturer to seek registration for a dicamba-based product since labels were vacated earlier this year. BASF and Bayer have also requested similar registrations. With the proposed soybean label, it would allow for over-the-top dicamba-tolerant soybeans before, during, and immediately after planting. Over-the-top applications through the V2 stage, but no later than June 12th, would also be allowed. Syngenta is working on a cotton label that would also allow for similar applications before, during, and after planting. Due to the application involving a new use pattern for dicamba, the EPA is providing the comment a 30-day public comment period on the registration application, consistent with the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. The EPA also seeks comments on the associated draft labeling Syngenta submitted, which is available in the docket. That had a lot of tongue twisters in that word.
It sure did.
That one. So did my best there, but passing it over to you.
Perfect. The National Corn Growers Association, along with 5 other organizations, sent a letter to the Department of Commerce asking for reconsideration of the petition by Corteva, which would place duties on imports of 2,4-D herbicide. That letter asked for the department to consider the impact on farmers if the restriction goes into effect. The Director of Public Policy at the National Corn Growers Association, Nancy Martinez, says that reducing imports of the 2,4-D could have a serious impact on farmers. Farmers and producers know that they cannot rely on a single domestic supplier of the herbicide because there's not enough supply to meet the demand. This potential restriction comes at a difficult time where farmers are already dealing with the rising input costs and low commodity prices. This sounds like something I would hear in my economics class. Martinez says our goal is to make sure that agencies are responsible for the investigation and understand what could happen in this scenario to farmers across the nation. It could also cause supply chain disruptions, resulting in those shortages we talked about. Those sort of things are going to be really disruptive to farmers when they rely on assessing herbicides at the right time. The U.S. Department of Commerce is expected to make a primary decision in early September. So I guess time will tell.
Time will tell. Well, Delaney, taking a look at that's a little funny to say, passing the story back to myself. But as we take a look at Washington, D.C. this week and some Farm Bill updates, the Farm Bill Coalition, which is a group of rural and urban alliance credited folks, noted to carry out farm bills to enactment, is a one-sided talking point, according to House Ag Chairman G.T. Thompson. He said that he insists on a $53 billion increase in farm subsidies, meanwhile seeing cuts in SNAP. But time is running out for passage of the new farm bill this year, and farm groups have been silent for weeks, now calling for prompt congressional action as we near election. Since this is an election year, politics will soon freeze for all legislative folks. That's already starting to polarize the House and Senate. The House was not expecting to vote until after Labor Day on the Farm Bill that was approved by its Agriculture Committee before Memorial Day, but the only hope may be the passage of a House-Senate compromise bill now after the November 5th general elections. Senate Agriculture Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow said that she will not accept cuts in SNAP or the removal of guardrails on climate funding. Both are goals of the House and Senate Republicans, but she has proposed increases of at least 5% in so-called reference prices for all major crops. The House bill and Senate Republican framework call for an average of 15% increases. Stabenow was noted as saying a farm bill is not passed through slogans and posturing. The path to passing a bipartisan farm bill has always been holding together the broad farm and food coalition that has formed the foundation of every successful bill for decades past. So, sounds like a lot of back and forth wishy-washiness, but all in all, not a lot of confidence there that a bill will get passed before the next election.
Our next story is that Japan received the first shipment of ETBE from U.S. corn-based ethanol late last week. Following a recent policy change by the Japanese government, the country has received its first shipment of ethyl terpentryl ether, or ETBE, made from U.S. corn-based ethanol. According to the U.S. Grains Council, this first shipment to Japan marks the country's new demand for U.S. ethanol-based products, as well as a milestone in efforts to develop the U.S. ethanol market internationally. The policy change recognizes the greenhouse gas benefits of ETBE, which is a component of gasoline, and that means that U.S. corn-based ethanol is now able to be used in the production of ETBE to be imported into Japan. The Asian nation will allow U.S. ethanol to meet up to 44% of the total estimated annual demand of 217 million gallons of ethanol used in the production of ETBE, which about equates to around 96 million gallons of ethanol. Japan Biofuels Supply purchased the first shipment of ETBE from the U.S., which was unloaded in a port near Tokyo and then a port near Osaka. This shipment is of roughly 14 million gallons, which is equal to about 2 million bushels of corn demand, the U.S. Grain Council outed. So exciting time for what the corn industry could have and what the ethanol industry could be internationally.
It certainly could open up another big market for U.S. ethanol and corn producers. But as the USDA and others continue to monitor and report on the outbreak of avian influenza in dairy herds, as we reported on the podcast last week, Iowa State University has put forward some new research offering a potential explanation for how cattle, and more specifically the milk, is being infected. We turn it over now to my interview. Well, as we continue to look at the impact that avian influenza is having on the dairy industry, we're joined today by Rahul Nelly, an assistant professor for the Iowa State University Veterinary Diagnostic Lab in Ames, Iowa. Rahul, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Delaney. Thank you.
So, Rahul, I'm very excited to dig into the new report that Iowa State has recently put out related to avian influenza impact in dairy herds. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about your background and how you found yourself at Iowa State.
My background is quite long, but I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So, I'm a DVM graduate from India, so I moved to Scotland to do my master's and finished my master's, got into England, and that's where I did my work on influenza in University of Nottingham. And then from there, I moved to Michigan as postdoc, and from there to Iowa for a postdoc, and then ended up here as a faculty member. So that's a long history, in 3 lines, maybe. But over these years, I have experience with working with different animal viruses, and all along I have been working in veterinary colleges throughout my life, and I get out of the veterinary university. So I know exactly, how a veterinary universities work and how we deal with animals day in, day out.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. It seems like you're really the perfect person to talk about the larger issue here of avian influenza in dairy cattle specifically. And so we reported on the headline of Iowa State's recent study looking at how avian influenza was kind of impacting dairy cattle and in turn humans through that as well. When we look at that study that Iowa State did and your team worked on, how did the idea for this study come together, and how quickly were you able to pull those pieces together given the recent impact and headlines we've been seeing around this topic?
Yeah, that's a really, a great way of, working as a team here at Iowa State is made all this difference, being active, being fast, and addressing to the current needs of the situation, emerging situation, I should say. So first and foremost for that is like the team, and the leadership. So obviously our dean rooms, and our department chair, Dr. Halber, and our media director, Maine. So these are all these leadership, gave us that flexibility to work together and made sure, right, you deliver it to our stakeholders. Stakeholders are our most important, when I'm saying stakeholders, these are our veterinarians across all the 99 counties in Iowa, and then the farmers, and foremost, those are most important for us. We take very seriously about farmers' concerns, and that's all part of the leadership. And then as a faculty here, we already have these kind of established protocols to work on any situation like this, like in any emerging situation. That includes, developing PCRs, developing latest diagnostic technologies and all that. So when we have that, so we actually came up as a team of veterinary pathologists, diagnosticians, postdocs, students, we all actually came together, and then collectively we worked on this, at a very rapid pace. This is by far the fastest manuscript I have ever worked with. Within 2 months, we actually finished the study, and then we came out and then put it out there, simply because we need to address that concern of our stakeholders. Why is it happening in dairy cattle right now?
Yeah, and so let's get into what you found through your research and talk about how the avian influenza seems to have an affinity, it sounds like, for the mammary tissue specifically within dairy cattle.
So, I think most farmers, may already know about this influenza in general, right? So because, they might have a backyard of poultry, they might be interested in the commercial poultry. So the commercial poultry is, traditionally speaking, like there's always this highly pathogenic H5N1 or any other influenza viruses are very common in bird species and also like in the swine production. But we never actually heard about influenza in bovine, especially the influenza A virus we're talking here. And then this influenza A virus, particularly, we all know influenza or flu, we usually call them, are mostly respiratory infections, right? So this is the first time we have ever seen something like this happening in the mammary gland. So this is like a surprise for us. And when our pathologist, Dr. Barrow, when they actually first reported it, many fellow scientists were also skeptical, right? Really, this is not true. Maybe you are doing something different. So it was hard to convince other people that is happening there. And our study have actually shown some of those additional proofs that this is really happening in the mammary gland of the dairy cat.
So as you think about it getting into the mammary gland, how does that happen?
Yeah. So that's where I came in. So that's intriguing for me, like, being worked with coronaviruses in the past and influenza viruses in the past. So I was like always fascinated, like, why these viruses mutate so often, how the hosts responds to these viruses. That's my interest and that's my passion. I want to go deep. So, and when Dr. Bell, other veterinary pathologist, he's also co-lead in the manuscript. He reached out to me and said, "Hey, Rahul, we have this experience. Like let's work together." So, and then I said, "Yeah, I'm more than happy to jump in." And then the first question I had is, okay, this is mammary gland, and nobody knows if there is any receptors or the molecules which allow the virus to bind. That's the first part to happen. When virus binds, then it starts to go in and then start the infection, replicates inside the cell, and then so on and so forth. But are there enough receptors to this happen? Or is the virus have changed something? Is it shifted to bind to something else than the traditional known knowledge of using these sialic acid receptors?
I think a good point of clarification for those of our listeners who don't have a super strong science background, myself included, what is an example or a definition of a receptor?
So yeah, I was expecting that, right? So I want to give you the context here. A receptor is nothing but a protein molecule, right? So basically, it's like a docking station, right, for the virus. So if you have a docking station, of course, something will come and bind it. Like that could be in a real world example, anything. Like if you have a car driveway, and then you say there's a parking lot, yes, the car can actually come and park in that parking lot, right? That kind of situation. So there are always several of these protein molecules crowned on various cells, right? So that includes the respiratory tract, nasal tract, mammary gland, even on the skin, you have these proteins. But what happens is some of these proteins will actually, the viruses, they are parasites. They want to come and replicate and then propagate for themselves too. So in their terms, okay, yeah, I have a docking station, so let's go and bind to the docking station. So it actually binds to those receptors and say, okay, we have these receptors, it goes binds. And now the cell can actually put up a strong immune response. Say, hey, this is someone unknown. I don't want this person. Get rid of it. And then obviously the body will actually trigger some immune response and clears it out. But that's not always the case. Maybe the virus is so powerful it can't. So now virus gets into the cell and then it starts to replicate inside the host cell. And then the thing is, the virus wants to replicate and then create more progeny of it, so then they can also propagate. That's the whole idea. So we are actually trying to block it. We don't want them to infect our cells. That's the whole idea. So that's a receptor in a very layman terms, I would say.
No, I think that helps break it down a lot. That helps me as well. Okay. So as you think, then that's how it kind of gets into the mammary tissue. How does it transfer between cow to cow?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we don't know yet, right? So that's a part we are still working on. So what we know so far is these mammary gland and then the respiratory tract of the dairy cattle has all these receptors which are needed for the influenza, which is these receptors we call sialic acids. There are two different forms. One is called avian kind of receptor, and another one is a mammalian receptor. When we say as a scientist avian receptor is because those are receptors which are mostly the avian species, the viruses which are adapted to the avian species, that is birds, poultry, and those viruses bind to those receptors. But in case of human receptors or like mammalian receptors, most of the human viruses bind to that, including the pig viruses. So that's how we classified it, right? So when we, just for our own understanding. So when we, both these receptors are present or not is the question. And we found both of those receptors are present in the dairy cattle, and more so the avian receptors. So the avian type of receptors are abundant in the mammary gland. And when it's obvious for us, right, like when we saw that, oh yeah, that makes sense. Now that's why the virus bound to the mammary gland. The question still remains, okay, they are present all along. Why now? Is the question. So what changed? Is it the virus that changed itself to actually bind to this? Or is it something else? So those are the questions we are still answering. But we know for sure from the current research, there's so many labs working day in, day out, every day. Yeah. So they already have some preliminary data and also confirmed data that the virus can stay outside the milk. Once after the milking is done, it can stay outside for more than 3 hours, or around 3 hours, I should say. Right? And then consuming a raw milk, unpasteurized milk, can cause infection. So that's there is evidence. So there is always a risk. But the point here is we haven't tried everything like that in human, because you can't do a human trials yet. That's not right. So whatever we have is all experimental studies. So when as a scientist, we say only when we have evidence. We didn't see any evidence yet, but that's not to say I don't want to take a chance or a risk.
Rahul, I think the other big question, in addition to the why now question that you just mentioned, is there anything in your research that leads you to believe other animal species like hogs, goats, sheep, etc., could also contract the virus?
Yeah, that's a great question again. So yes, we know for sure that there are other animal species. So far, based on the current USDA data, it looks like more than 20 mammalian species within America got affected by these highly pathogenic H5N1. So that includes house mice. The house mice are everywhere in most of the months. So this is reported in New Mexico. And then obviously cats, including the wild cats, are also getting infected. But that said, we also have to bear in mind that America in general, like if you look at from Texas all the way to Iowa, this whole entire stream is a migratory corridor for several birds. Okay, these birds are moving all the way from South America to Canada. So this is one of their stopping points. So birds are known to have a subclinical infection. So they don't show any signs. They can shed the virus and then they move on. And then occasionally some birds might die because of their own, immune compromised birds probably will die. And we need to be all, as a farming community, we all have to be vigilant that if you see a dead bird on your farm, so maybe it's a good way to actually take it to a vet and make sure that doesn't have any kind of pathogens involved. Maybe it's an accident, but I don't want to take a chance, right? That's the risk. So these things you need to bear in mind. We always will be. This won't be the first and this won't be the last. Always, because we are in that migratory path of these birds. So we will always have that risk of having either influenza or could be some other virus. So as long as we are vigilant and we are working as collectively as a community to address this issue, so we should be, I think, do some biosecurity measures such that we are all safe.
Yeah, Rahul, I think that's a great place to end our conversation today, is to talk about some of those prevention measures that producers, regardless of species, could and should be taking to help prevent this on their farms.
So, yeah, that's important because this is where I see, like, we have a lot of great veterinarians, local veterinarians across America. They are trained really well in different veterinary universities, and all universities have their great extension teams. That includes even in Iowa. So if you have several places for help, so if none of everything fails, obviously you can contact any of the university, professors here. But, I would actually go out, talk to a local veterinarian, and then try, whatever you can to prevent the infection.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining on the podcast today. Certainly appreciate your insight and time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek.
Fresh news this week in this space was reported by the Colorado Department of Agriculture, which will now require regular testing of dairy milk as the highly pathogenic avian influenza continues to spread throughout Colorado. Commercial cow dairy farms licensed by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment are not already under a bird flu-related quarantine will undergo weekly testing of bulk samples. In the last 30 days, 30 cattle herds in Colorado have been affected by the virus, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, 39 flocks in Colorado have had a bird flu outbreak, including both poultry and non-poultry. As we saw last week, 8 people in Colorado have contracted the virus, with the most of any other state in the country. 7 of those people work on poultry farms, while the one works on a dairy farm. The order mandate testing does not have a set expiration date, so agriculture leaders or the state veterinary must issue another order to cease the testing.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about that at a conference I was at this week, focused on the swine industry, but just looking at how quickly, avian influenza spread to the dairy industry, and could it hit other industries such as the pork industry is the million-dollar question right now.
It really is.
Well, Delaney, I think that does it for our news for this week, but let's take a moment to wrap up today's show with some commodity market updates. As the weekend weather and longer-term forecast turns hotter and drier after some scattered showers this weekend, traders are trying to find their footing, weighing out if a weather premium needs to be factored into the corn market. Weekly ethanol production dropped to 1.095 million barrels per day last week, down from just over 1.1 million barrels the week prior, but came in above trader expectations and the third highest week for this marketing year. Taking a look at some of the factors moving the soybean markets this week, hot and dry weather as we head into a crucial period for pod fill will be a major focus for both farmers and traders alike. The bright spot in the market this week was certainly favorable export sales reports for soy meal and new crop corn appeared to help keep a floor under these two commodities. The spring wheat tour is also underway this week in North Dakota, and early yield estimates are coming in quite strong. The average yield estimate for northwest and north central North Dakota is reflecting a 53.7 bushels per acre compared to 45.6 bushels per acre last year and just 40 bushels per acre for the 5-year average. And to wrap up this week, in the larger economic news sector, the Chinese government has announced another economic stimulus plan, a whopping $27.5 billion in loans at a reduced interest rate, largely to stimulate consumer spending. While it's too soon to tell if this will also increase appetite for commodities, such as corn and soybeans, that could be a potential result of this big news coming out of China. But Delaney, another week in the seat. You're heading back to school very soon.
A month. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, back to school shopping is going to start back up for our listeners, I'm sure, soon, and for you, hopefully, as well. But folks, in the meantime, as you're thinking about getting ready for the school season, football season, or harvest season, be sure to follow along with us on social media so you can stay up to date on those updates as the busy time of year is ahead of us. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. But Delaney, what do you say with that? We let the people go.
Let's let the people go.